So we're going to move on to questions. Folks can still drop questions in the Q&A box, but I'll also turn to some of our panelists to offer their thoughts and questions as well. So I'm going to start with Professor Venu Mehta.
Thank you, James and Agni. Wonderful papers. James, I'm really impressed with your flow, your paper. And because this is a grad seminar, I would even like to appreciate your academic integrity and excellence in that way. And of course, Agni, the same for you. But my question, I'm sorry, James, I do not have a question for you right now, maybe a little later, but I have a question for Agni and Ayan combined, because Agni had a very specific gendered role and space and vulnerability and coercive power in their paper, and Ayan about like animal thing, right? And my question is about that. Ayan and Agni, how would you both reply to this question slash situation from my own experience? So I worked as an animal rescuer until I moved to the US in 2015. And it was a time, Ayan, when it was not a very frequent uh, phenomena that people go out as an activist or as a rescuer. And I did it alone. And my half of my home was like an animal hospital, like pigeons and birds and everything, even squirrel and everything. But whenever I used to do that, I heard one thing: you are a girl slash woman. You shouldn't do this. It's not your work. It's the man's work, right? Like male work. It doesn't suit you. It really de-dignified you, and so on and so forth. But my family didn't mind. I didn't mind, and I didn't even understand what like they were actually making about. Like they were making it gendered. But in my own experience, it also comes from the folk literature in Gujarati language and culture that women have been always in the forefront in when it comes to saving a life, and specifically a jiva's life, an animal's life. For example, the domestic help at my home, and we have several snakes and mongoose in my garden, right? So whenever she's like washing clothes, and whenever she will see a snake, she would just tell my mom, Auntie, a snake. That's it. No reaction, nothing. She is brave, right? And so, like, how, Ayan and Agni, how do you see gender in this in this kind of thing?
I believe that because of the way I have been brought up in my family, it has been for a very long time two females. So I was able to understand what femininity is. So I believe it comes with the comfort and the acceptance of everything. That is why uh, when females are around animals, or the feminine energy is around animals, they are able to more, I would say, intertwine with each other rather than comparing with a male figure or a masculine energy, I would say. Particularly with animals, that is I've observed and also have felt.
Thank you.
I suppose I would want to know more, Professor Mehta, about why you were told that wasn't um, appropriate for a woman. And like you said, you weren't quite sure. It just reminded me of a story. I was in the YMCA and I heard two men talking about a bike trail that they both liked. And I heard one of them say, well, I'm comfortable biking on this trail, but if I was a 125-pound woman, I wouldn't be comfortable biking on the trail. And I remember thinking a woman's size isn't really the issue. It's the idea that it is acceptable for there to be violence against women. And so therefore we have to police how women behave. And so I'm getting little echoes of that we need to police women's behaviors of propriety rather than interrogate patriarchal and in America, white supremacist structures. So that's why in America, at least, you're always hearing women are told all these ways to be safe. And yet violence against women keeps happening. We need to flip the script and put the pressure on the patriarchy, not on individual women for their behaviors. So I would like to know more about that story at some point, Professor. And I didn't know that you were rescuing animals back in India. I think that's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah.
So next up is Dr. Rajmani.
Okay, I really wanted to appreciate both of you, even though I am from India. I came to know a lot of things from James today. In fact, he motivated me to go to that place immediately. That's number one. And his presentation is very good, excellent. So many pictures. I don't know how he got all the pictures. I think he would have got some kind of inspiration from Professor Venumith. I always like pictures, images, and all these things. Very good. In fact, that particular place is the real symbolic example for the Hindu, Muslim, and also Jain, because it's really very good. And you mentioned very briefly Acharya Sri Virak Sagarji. He did lot of revolutions there, and you brought it in a very nice way. And I want to congratulate you for this one. Agni, I want to tell you very good presentations. When I thought that movie Great Indian Kitchen, I also saw that movie. I never went to that particular level of movie, your way of approaching and all these things. But one thing I want to tell you, violence against women, it starts before her birth and it continues until her death. That is the one we are always telling. And also one more point here I want to ask all of you, because it's very scientific questions. Still Orthodox houses, they are not allowing the women when she got the menstrual period. They won't allow her to go to the kitchen, and they won't allow her to go for the cooking and all these things. And the Orthodox people are claiming when the lady is getting menstrual, that's not good for the people. That's not good for, not for because of some reasons, because of scientific reasons. So far, I haven't got any scientific reasons. What do you think about that? Because the movie also touches that particular point.
I would say yes, there's no scientific basis, but even in more secular cultures, there is a heavy prohibition on discussing menstruation, and there's a concept that it is sort of more disgusting than other bodily functions. So it isn't really can't be described just by religiosity, or at least not to the extent that I understand it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Dr. Miller.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you both, Agni and James. I know that this work comes out of deep research that you both have done both during and following Professor Dickstein's course in vegan studies. And one of the questions I think about from a very high level is this is an Engaged Jane Studies conference, and the connections between the work that you are doing and Jane Studies and Engaged Jane Studies makes sense to me. It's sort of self-evident as I watch your presentations. I wondered if both of you might connect the work you're doing in vegan studies and how you see it fitting into Engaged Jane Studies. I very much see it as so, but maybe for our audience and those who are encountering vegan studies in this for the first time, I thought the connections, you might draw them out a little bit more if you don't mind.
James, you want to go first on that? We haven't heard from you.
How it relates would be the principle of ahimsa and vegetarianism and deep reverence, a sense of live and let live, and in that way it's influenced it influenced the Palatana ban there. So yes.
Agni?
I think there's a tension in South Asian traditions about non-harm, because are we not harming for the sake of the being there, or are we not harming because we don't want the karmic fallout? And I think vegan studies really challenges that, because we have to look at our reasons for non-harm, and how one thing that attracted me to Jain studies is the depth that the ahimsa doctrine takes down to the Nagodas, down to the right. Like that just was so exciting for me as an engineer in my previous life. And so I think vegan studies pushes that issue to the forefront. And it's also incredibly culturally relevant and very relevant for climate crisis, specifically dairy and the resultant beef industry that will always be there if we consume dairy.
On that note, I'd like to kind of chime in because it's relevant at this point and ask a question. James, this is primarily for you. Don't worry, it's not like I don't think too technical. But for those of you who don't know James as one of our graduate students, and because this is a colloquium, I think it's just really relevant what I'll try to draw out, which is that James lives in Texas, used to work as an animal control officer, came across Jainism, came across Arihanta, was vegetarian and vegan and so on, is really on this very interesting journey. And I guess, James, my question is, I'd be curious how you found yourself, say, coming to the program, coming to vegan studies, and then, I think typically people who aren't doing deeper level analysis look at things like beef bans, look at things like prohibitions on beef, and say we should be on board with that. We should be on board with that. But, in our class and elsewhere, I've asked you to kind of dig a little deeper because if we're really concerned with other forms of harm, if we're talking about things like aparigraha and anekantavada and ahimsa, it kind of nuances the situation. So I guess I'd like maybe if you could share maybe it's a little personal reflection of maybe like where you came from. You come to vegan studies and then you write this paper that's kind of getting into the weeds of how we can't just maybe promote just this kind of blanket veganism without a sensitivity to cultural complexities.
You know, I found the Jain path, and I began studying the Jain path out of just an interest in a vegetarian religion. It just interested me, and and so and finding out about Palitana was an interesting thing. I had no clue that there was a vegetarian city in a uh, now I had come to this path by being an animal control officer, feeling compassion for animals. Putting animals to sleep. I felt that I couldn't continue with doing this anymore, and so I wanted to embrace ahimsa in my own life, and so yes, it's just been. I'm sorry. What was the question again?
I guess my question is kind of what have you learned through this study that makes the kind of field of like veganism and promoting veganism more complicated? Because you chose a really controversial issue, but I feel like you handled it with such sensitivity and balance, but without like a fear of getting into that. So I don't know what did it make you walk away with?
Yeah. No, that yes, and actually, it was controversial, and and I guess you have a gut feeling when you're new to veganism and animal rights, you instantly think, oh, meat should be banned. This is when you see animals being slaughtered, and it brings an instinctual gut feeling. But when you stop and think about the repercussions, unintended consequences, maybe of such an action, and maybe other people's preferences, and yes, and it is to look at other people on their path, and Kantavad does shine a light on this, and and thinking of others in this. So yes.
Great. So we might have time for a couple more. I'm gonna pivot to Dr. Bohannik and then Rajmani, then we'll close with you if that's all right.
Yeah, great presentations, both of you. Actually, the whole day has been really superb. My primary question is for James. I'm, I just really feel like, you know, Polytown is so far away from us over here in the United States, but I feel like the same sort of discourse on a meta level maybe happens in the United States, the animal liberation movement. And I'm talking specifically about the relationship between top-down social change versus bottom-up social change. The need to sort of build the democratic base for social paradigm shift rather than sort of implementing a hierarchical top-down model of power, which then creates blowback, right? And I think that your case study here really demonstrates what that kind of blowback looks like with a top-down approach. And I've suspected that there might be something similar happening in Jain temples in the United States as well, where there's sort of a top-down push towards veganism that isn't quite ready in terms of like the grassroots, and then you get sort of blowback. So I guess and of course we see this, there's all this theorizing in the animal rights movement of, what happens if we could like outlaw meat tomorrow? Would we do it? It's like a thought experiment. And to what extent is legislative change effective and necessary? And at what point do we decide we're ready to push for a certain level of social change? How do we know that sort of like the culture and the society won't sort of just grow resentful and blow back? And I think the case of abortion is a really interesting example of what happens when there's sort of like a federal legislation that doesn't quite win over the hearts and minds of the masses, and then we end up fighting like a 50-year political struggle that just never seems to get resolved. And so I guess these are just some of they're not really uh, strong questions that I have, but I guess the broader question is like, what do you think the case study of Politana has to say to the modern vegan movement, the modern animal rights movement? And that's like my question for James. I would want to say something to Agni too. Agni, I think you're so interesting. Your work is so neat, but just knowing you on a personal level, uh, I don't know if I would describe you as a film buff or not, but you seem to be somebody who really gets a lot of value out of film, and I relate to that, and I know that you like horror films too. And Hope and I actually recorded a podcast about horror films and like trying to analyze what's going on and all of that. And I just think the sort of deep hermeneutical work that you're doing here is so interesting, and it's sort of it points to like to what degree is cultural construction happening in film, and to what degree is cultural reflection happening in film, and whether there's sort of like the value of a film like this is sort of like an awakening call to sympathize, against the main character, in this case. um how much of it, how much can film be a legitimating agent for violence? For example, the trope of the good guy with the gun, or the black sidekick, or, where film actually legitimates forms of oppression. So I guess again, I don't really have specific questions for either one of you, just as sort of like reflection on like, what do you see, Agni, as the value of this sort of like deep hermeneutical engagement with film as like as a text? So I guess those are my two questions for both of you.
Okay,
Go
so
ahead,
let me
Agni.
let me let me organize these and just make sure and we get out on time. So first, James, I think the question is how to use Polytana to reflect on, say, themes in the animal rights movement, not in Polytana, I guess mostly in the United States or the West, as it were. And then I think for Agni's more of a question, how do you view film as this kind of interpretive tool to some of the issues that you engage with? So go ahead, James.
It's interesting that you had brought up Professor Bahanik about the temples in America foregoing dairy in their rituals, and how that might not go over well with some of the constituents there. And yeah, I didn't think about that. And yeah, it's very similar. Yeah, I'd say that the change needs to come from from bottom up, and from the grassroots there, from the people. Uh, yeah, and yeah, I agree with that, and yeah, it needs to have the minority input, and some heftier debate on these topics. Because in the Palatana example, the people in the industries were not given much heads up, and in fact they were quite upset, and were headed to court over this. So uh, yeah, so it's like a might makes right kind of deal, and yeah, and so that's my 2 cents on that.
Thanks, James. Agni?
To the point on film, I would just say that a film that has a progressive and somewhat revolutionary message functions on two levels. For those who are in the oppressed group, they have a voice that has been legitimized by awards, by the mainstream. And it's also a therapeutic and cathartic artistic experience for those in those marginalized positions. So we shouldn't ever undercut the role of pop culture when dealing with oppressions and tackling oppressions.
So maybe folks should take our veganism in pop culture course that we offered at Arihanta Institute, where there's a lot of film analysis. Um, okay, I think we have time for one last one. Dr. Rajamani, you've been patient. Please close us
Okay,
out.
it is not only for Ayan. I want to ask all of you. And you 2025 Tamil Nadu statistics. 620,000 people dog bites. Around 30 people died last year itself. And then cattle attacked the man, and around 5 people died. Elephant attacked man, 10 people died. Even horse attacked man, and 1 person died. So the whole Tamil Nadu now is really, really big problem. I don't know whether it is because of the climate change. And in these situations, how we will go and tell about animal welfare and okay, take care of our animals and all these things. This is a very big question. Even it is arguing in the legal court nowadays in Tamil Nadu, our state.
Dr. Rajamani, I have had 5 times dog bite, one cat, one squirrel, and one parrot. Now I've had more than 52 rounds of rabies shot in my life. After I left India and like rescue, I can understand that. Rescue can become that way. You try to save something and they bite. The squirrel really took my thumb. It was almost gone, but so
I think we
I
found
don't know.
our
I
real
mean,
warrior
I
yogi.
wouldn't mind. It's just because they bite, just because they don't, they are afraid. I think I am not agree. I don't agree.
I don't know. I just said, Dr. Mehta, I think we found our real warrior yogi here, hiding amongst us, with all of those battle scars. I'm going to turn this back over to Dr. Miller. Thank you all. It was a wonderful panel.